Hello, this is David with Stupid Things People Do and what we can learn from them. And I'm bald today. Now, if you've been reading The Verge or following Fisher Broyle's employer handbook, you may already know about the little gem we're going to cover today. That said, real quick, if you're not already following Fisher Broyle's employer handbook, you probably should. That blog is on fleek. So yes, The Verge and the handbook. At this point, you're probably thinking, David, these guys talk about a lot of stuff. What in the world are you referring to? Well, nothing new. In fact, this story dates all the way back to 2020, and appropriately, it involves calling people Nazis. Now, a smart person would note that this narrows absolutely nothing down. Back in 2020, people were being called Nazis all the time. And that's true. Then, and now, communist, Nazi, Marxist, and fascist are all delightfully horrible names we like to call people we disagree with. Employees probably shouldn't call each other Nazis, and if they do, that's probably a trip to HR. But that's not what happened here. Have you seen this guy? Well, according to my sources, the back of that shirt says staff, so Camp Auschwitz staff. Not a good look. That's pretty messed up. Now, maybe this guy's just a vicious troll, but I'd say if it looks like a Nazi, yells like a Nazi, and goose steps around glorifying crimes against humanity like a Nazi, well, stay safe, homies. There are Nazis about. And that is what we're talking about. A Jewish employee at GitHub literally said exactly this at the end of the workday. Stay safe, homies. There are Nazis about. So this isn't exactly a boy who cried wolf scenario. There actually were Camp Auschwitz staff best case scenario trolls about. So this isn't exactly calling your coworkers names. But David, in the national climate of the 2020 elections, surely you can see how, without knowing the context, someone would construe that this employee was referring to all right-wing people as Nazis. And I mean, maybe. I'm not sure that bias via national hysteria is an excuse, but that devil's advocating voice in my head isn't exactly wrong either. Based on screenshots from The Verge, many employees did think our protagonist was referring to all right-wing people as Nazis. One employee complained, quote, "This is untasteful, IMO. People have the right to protest, period." That employee went on to explain, quote, "Unfortunately, some have escalated beyond appropriate means, but you don't see commie being dropped around the workplace, nor should Nazi." But here's the problem. That employee claimed that you don't see commie and Nazi being dropped around the workplace. But that's not actually true. And at least not at their workplace. You see, another employee had made a joke about the Nazis giving the Jews free health care, according to The Verge, and that person still worked for GitHub as of January 15th, 2021, whereas our protagonist, as of January 15th, did not. So that's a yikes. If there was a standard, it was not applied consistently. Now, normally, this is where we would talk about the ensuing lawsuit and insane legal implications that came along with said lawsuit, but this story has the best case ending you could possibly hope for. Bystander intervention. As it happens, 200 other GitHub employees created a petition stating, quote, "The clear insinuation is that a Jewish hubber was fired for calling a group of people that included neo-Nazi white supremacists Nazis. Because of this, hubbers no longer feel they can speak up against racism or hatred against protected characteristics like their religion." So HR messed up, and 200 other GitHub employees knew that HR messed up, and they put their names on paper calling out said mess up. So, how did leadership respond? Well, as countless TED Talks have noted, real leadership is admitting when you're wrong. And in response to the petition and the media attention, on January 17th that same year, GitHub released a blog explaining the situation and their actions. On Friday, January 8th, we separated with an employee. Later that day, and over the weekend, employees raised concerns about the circumstances of the separation. We took these concerns seriously. On Monday, January 11th, we engaged an outside investigator to conduct an independent investigation. On the evening of Friday, January 15th, the investigation revealed significant errors of judgment and procedure. Our head of HR has taken personal accountability and resigned yesterday morning, Saturday, January 16th. In light of these findings, we immediately reversed the decision to separate with the employee and are in communication with his representative. To the employee, we wish to say publicly, we sincerely apologize. As of March 15th, 2021, our protagonist still had not rejoined GitHub, but according to TechCrunch, quote, he and the company reached an amicable resolution. Amicable is a hard word to say when you're reading off a teleprompter, by the way. Anyway, back to the point. Leadership heard about what happened. And instead of doubling down or trying to save face or trying to point fingers and blame, they immediately investigated. And they got an outside investigator. There can be many benefits to an outside investigation when leadership is involved. Their head of HR took personal accountability instead of passing the buck and resigned, and GitHub tried to make reparations to the injured party. Firing a Jewish man for being upset about actual Nazis is stupid. But GitHub showcased the right way to take ownership and respond if we mess up. I mean, obviously talk to legal counsel, of course, but the response is going to resemble GitHub's. And for those who are thinking, hey, they only did this because of the backlash, I mean, maybe. Their response was pretty fast, and they still showcased the correct response regardless of their actual motivations. Also, I'd like to take a moment to quickly appreciate bystander intervention. Upon seeing their coworker being treated abusively, GitHub employees immediately spoke out in their coworker's defense, and they spoke up loudly. They drew attention to the issue, and they refused to accept wrong treatment. Their actions were the first step to correcting this whole debacle. Now, traditionally, bystander intervention is applied to sexual harassment prevention, but it can be applied to all types of harassment and bullying, since bullying involves isolating individuals and targeting them for ongoing or intense harassment. When bystanders rally around a potential victim, it prevents that victim from being isolated. This discourages would-be harassers and bullies, since they know they'll be facing group resistance, and it makes it so that when a bully does get to the bullying thing, it's very visible, since there are so many witnesses. Now, sometimes there are significant power differences between the harasser and the bystanders. Maybe the harasser is the HR director, or maybe they're just the most well-liked person in the office. In these instances, bystanders may rightly fear that they could be the targets of harassment or retaliation if they speak up and say something. In those situations, the bystanders may want to delegate instead of directly confronting the harassment or the discrimination. They can report the inappropriate behavior to the proper authority, and then that authority can act. When bystanders report inappropriate behavior to the correct authority, this creates that same high visibility scenario as a direct confrontation would, especially if there are many witnesses corroborating the harassment or the bullying. Of course, when the harasser or the bully is someone in a position of power, that bystander delegation requires the organization to have the proper checks and balances in place if it's going to do anything. Now, one objection may be found in the message history on this issue. The whole problem arose because someone was triggered by the use of the word Nazi. They did a bystander intervention, and they accidentally created a situation where their triggered reaction got a Jewish man wrongfully fired. And that's a valid objection. As bystanders, you are not the purveyor of truth, justice, and the American way. It is very possible that through misunderstanding, a bystander could easily become the bully themselves. They may accidentally single out and isolate an individual they wrongly think is acting inappropriately. Because of this, bystander intervention cannot simply be a crusade to rid all language or action that might be construed as offensive. For example, Nazi is normally quite offensive, and it's bandied around like party beads at Mardi Gras, but that doesn't mean that every use of the word Nazi or Marxist should be a fireable offense. And creating a toxic atmosphere of intolerance at work is a great way to turn bystander intervention into bystander harassment. Fortunately, bystander harassment is very preventable. You just need to have a conversation. You can ask, why are you saying that? And what do you mean? If the offender doesn't realize they're being offensive, they can correct their behavior. And if the offender does realize they're being offensive, polite, direct confrontation can call attention to that fact. Thanks for listening. This is David Seibotham. I'm bald now. See you next time.